Hey everyone, Steven here, and today I'm reviewing the KTC M27T20 gaming monitor. Key to Combat, KTC, is part of a much larger STC brand. So right now I'm going to showcase two screen grabs from their website, and this says that they've been making display hardware for 27 years as an OEM manufacturer for other monitor brands. Two of the major brands it mentions it makes products for are Samsung and ViewSonic. So this is a similar trajectory as the Curry brand I did a monitor review for a couple months ago. With the timeline being similar, my guess is all of these companies branched out during COVID as the demand for computer components increased as people started to work a lot more from home. And in certain areas, you were facing shortages along with companies just wanting to take advantage of the boom in the industry. So this combination led to a lot of these brands that were making components for other major companies to start doing their own thing. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a background here before I continue with the review, as you may have noticed a large increase in monitor brands in the last couple of years. As with all of my reviews, I'll cover the specs first and then get into what I like, don't like, in the gray area before wrapping the video up. The M27T20 is a 27-inch 1440p 165Hz mini LED VA panel monitor with 576 local dimming zones and a 1 millisecond motion picture response time. This covers 99% of the sRGB and Adobe RGB color space with a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio in HDR with a VESA certified peak brightness of 1000 nits and a delta E of less than 2. This is FreeSync and G-Sync compatible. Most of the footage in this video has that turned off because if it is turned on, local dimming isn't available, as well as the motion picture response time adjustment. For ports, this has one DP 1.4, two HDMI 2.0, one USB Type-C that can deliver 90 watts of power and be used as a display input. This has two USB 3.0 expansion ports with a built-in KVM switch, so you can connect a keyboard and mouse to the display that will work across multiple devices that are connected to the monitor. And last, you have a headphone jack. For physical adjustments, this can raise and lower 130 millimeters. This can swivel to the left and right 45 degrees. It can tilt 5 degrees forwards and 20 degrees backwards, and this can pivot 90 degrees in either direction. This is VESA compatible for mounting on a monitor arm with a 100mm by 100mm pattern. This has two 2-watt speakers, which I'll do a sound test for in a minute, and inside of the box you get the monitor, stand, one DP cable, one HDMI cable, the power adapter, power cord, the user manual, a color correction report, which I always like when companies include this, and last you have a warranty card, which this has a more unique breakdown for the warranty than I've seen with other monitors, as you get 12 months for the panel, control buttons, and interface. The base, adapter, DP cable, and power cord all have a 3-month warranty, so it gives you this bigger breakdown of what's covered for how long versus other ones I've seen just say, hey, 1 year on the panel. Last, we have the price here. This is normally $549.90. Right now you can find a coupon for $150. I don't know how long that is going to last, but typically I've found that this has some type of discount or coupon. So I got mine for $459.99, so about $90 off. They're coming off of Black Friday sales with this, so these may stick around for a while, especially at the beginning of the new year. We may see some, maybe potentially better, but in general, I've seen this on sale, and I have to judge this based off of that. So keep in mind, with this review, I'm judging it off of this very consistent discounted price that this seems to hold at, which is sub $500. They also have a bunch of other options as well. They have a 4K version of this exact monitor, it's just 4K, and then they have a 4K 32-inch IPS panel monitor that has 1152 local dimming zones with it. They also have OLED monitors, so there's a ton of options. Again, this company makes panels or made panels for Samsung, so a lot of the panels that you see with those monitors, they probably have their own version of it, right? And that kind of is what I'm getting as I'm looking at all these different options that they have, and it's pretty solid pricing. So now that I've covered the basic specs, let's do a quick sound test on the speakers with the camera roughly 3 to 4 feet away from the monitor. And the only adjustment in post is making sure the levels are as close to what this sounds like in person. I do want to make everybody aware of the fact that by default, this is at 50% for the volume in the panel. So you want to change that to 100% if you're going to control the volume mainly through your PC. Next, let's cover the panel menu, and I'm not going to cover everything here, just some of the bigger settings, but the menu button is a single button on the right hand side of the monitor, which I prefer over multiple buttons. The first tab is the display tab, which has brightness, contrast, black equalizer, presets, aspect ratio, sharpness, and professional modes. For the showcase of the presets, we have user, movie, photo, eco, reader, RTS, and FPS. These are custom art pieces that I'm showcasing right now, also from the artist I work with, Zach Raw. I'll have links for his stuff in the description if you want to check him out. After this, we have the professional mode. You have native, sRGB, Adobe RGB, and then you have the DCI P3. The presets here are okay, they're not great, but they're okay. I've kept this on user personally for all of the footage, and you can see my adjustments here in the display tab that I'm showcasing right now. If you want to do that, that does not account for the adjustments that I've made in the NVIDIA control panel though. After that, you have the color tab, which has color temperature, gamma, hue, saturation, and blue light. Looking at color temperature, you have normal, cool, warm, and user. The monitor leans a little bit red in my opinion, so I've left my setting on cool. After this, you have the gaming setup tab, which has FreeSync/G-Sync, which turning this on will not allow you to change the motion picture response time or allow for local dimming. Keep that in mind. After that, you have the overdrive settings, which let's pause here for a second while I showcase this in the UFO test. I still don't have a trail pursuit set up to record this, but you will get a decent idea of what this will look like in person just from the footage and stills that I'm going to showcase right now. So first you have off, which this is going to have the most apparent just regular ghosting here. After that, you have standard, which this has like the least amount. This in advanced, in my opinion. This one is one I've been using. I've been using this in advanced back and forth just to see the difference, and this one is really good. This is just a great still for my camera also here, so very minimal compared to off. So now we have advanced, and we see some of that ghosting here. Now again, this is more just limitations of the fact that I don't have the trail pursuit camera. It is more minimal than having this off. It's pretty close to standard, and again, I trade back and forth just to see the difference, and to me, very, very similar. Maybe slightly faster, it's just my camera can't record it as well, so it almost give it a slight edge over standard, even though the screen grabs here wouldn't necessarily portray that. And last, we have ultra fast, which this is where you can see that inverse ghosting. You shouldn't see that blue there. That blue is just bleeding over from the little Martian. And this one I don't typically use because of this inverse ghosting. It's just really, really apparent. So here I think standard and advanced is the best option. Next, you have the Game Assist tab, which has all the normal stuff you would find in there, like the crosshair and the timer. And then last is going to be the motion picture response time, which you can turn this on or leave it off. Personally, I never use these modes as the monitor always dims the panel, and the trade-off with it potentially reducing motion blur doesn't always seem like a good trade-out in my opinion, because I'd rather have the regular vibrancy that the panel offers just using the overdrive settings. Next is the Advanced tab, and there is a lot going on here, so I'm going to cover these one by one, starting with HDR. So this has off or automatic, which is basically on. You just need to keep in mind that you'll need to turn HDR on in Windows also. After that, you have the RGB light, which changes the two light strips on the back of the panel. You have off, breathing, red, green, and blue. Next is the local dimming, and for this you have off, auto, standard, and then high is going to be last. This is another image from Zach Raw that we did for Subnautica Below Zero, custom art piece here. With this, you get to see the difference with the levels that you have here. I typically have kept this on standard and high. This is a still image though. It still runs great when you're gaming. I will label games and let you know if it's HDR, local dimming is on high with that. The local dimming zones here are important as well. We have 576, and I've increased the mouse icon size so you can see that the area around that is illuminated. So instead of these massive sections, the more micro LEDs for local dimming that you have, this will be closer around the object that is bright, and then it will turn off those that don't need it. So this is where you can see in this still image that the area around the mouse icon is a little bit more illuminated here compared to everything else is just off in that black image. So this kind of mimics what you would get with an OLED. You're getting pure blacks here. You will get this halo effect around it though. The more local dimming zones that you have, the less you have of that halo effect, until you get all the way to like an OLED where every pixel is backlit, and that has no halo effect around it because again, every pixel is backlit with that. So you're looking at like millions of pixels depending on the screen size there. This is almost, it's a little bit more than half of what you find on the Samsung Neo G7. That one has like 1196. I will cover a little bit of a comparison towards the end of the video with that, because I know that question is going to come up. How does this compare to the Samsung Neo G7? I will talk about that, like I said, at the end of the video, but for right now, it's about half, a little over half compared to that. So there is more haloing effect on this monitor compared to that monitor. And one more reminder on this, you cannot adjust a local dimming if FreeSync / G-Sync is turned on. You have to turn that off and then you have access to local dimming. Keep that in mind. Next, you have the KVM switch. With this, you have the options of turning this off, put it on auto, USB upstream, or then Type-C. I'm showcasing the Legion Go connected via USB Type-C to the monitor, and then the keyboard and mouse are connected to the monitor, and I'm still able to use them on the Legion Go. So with this, you connect your keyboard and mouse to the monitor, and then whatever is connected to that monitor can still run those peripherals, which is really cool. So this is Subnautica running on the Legion Go, but I'm using the keyboard and mouse here to play it without needing to connect that to the Legion Go. Again, this is a really cool feature. I like that this is included here. Next is the display data channel / command interface. What this allows you to do is download software that will interface with the monitor from your PC. So you can change everything from the panel menu here just through your computer and that application instead of needing to do it through the panel menu itself. Personally, I haven't used this. I don't mind using the panel menu to make all these adjustments, but it is a nice thing that they have this here for those that want it. Next, we have the OSD style, and with this one, we have 4 different colors. You have glow orange, crystal blue, begonia red, which is actually the color that the cable management is, that little color around there in the bottom left-hand corner, and then you have cypress green. The pictures show this as being red for that color accent for the cable management, but again, it's the begonia red, which is, to me, it's almost like pinkish. After this, we have the input tab, pretty straightforward here, just shows your inputs. And then last, we have system settings. The only things I want to cover here, OSD setup. You can change the location of the on-screen display. I have mine moved over from the center of the screen, which is on by default, down to the bottom right-hand corner. And then the audio, I mentioned that by default, this is at 50%. You're going to want to bump that up to 100%. So now that I've covered the specs in the panel menu, let's get into what I like about this monitor, starting with the visuals, which are very good here. And that is across the board, regardless of whether or not you're using HDR or you have that turned off, the visuals just, they pop on the screen. So it has good vibrancy to it, which I always love in a monitor. And there are plenty of settings that you can adjust in the panel menu, which I think this has a good panel menu as well. A lot of times when we look at some of these newer brands that come out, they don't offer the same adjustments in that panel that you would find on other brands. So we just happen to see a lot of things are missing. They give you a lot with this. The presets are okay, like I mentioned. They're not incredible. They're good. I think some people will like them and some people will just do their own settings with this, like I have. And if you do decide to go that route, there are all the options there to tailor this to the visual style that you want. So I think they nailed it with the panel menu and the adjustments that you have there to make the visuals that are really good here just custom to what you want. Again, I like a more vibrant monitor here, and I've adjusted this accordingly, and I just think it looks really good. And with the HDR here, the VESA certified HDR 1000, so it can hit that 1000 nits peak brightness. That just makes everything with HDR and the whites that you get out of this really pop. So you have a lot of control when it comes to how bright you can make this monitor. So now you pair that with local dimming and it just comes together for a really good combination for HDR. Now, one of the big draws towards this is going to be the local dimming that it has with the 576 zones. I misstated that earlier. That is actually just slightly under half when compared to the Samsung Neo G7. That one has 1196. With this, it's not going to have the same level of kind of clarity when it comes to the local dimming. You're going to get a little bit more kind of diffusion of that light around whatever the light source is when you're looking at something like a white cursor on a black background. But if you're gaming and things like that, it's still going to perform really well. And I think one of the things that KTC is doing here is they're fitting an in-between niche that you don't see Samsung doing. They do it to a degree, but if we're looking at that Neo G7, that's a very expensive monitor, and KTC does have a monitor that more closely matches that one. That, again, I'll talk about those in a little bit. But if we're looking at, hey, can I get something that's kind of close, maybe half of the price, half of the local dimming zones and things like that, they just don't have it. KTC has come through and they've delivered a product that, again, is essentially, I mean, half the cost and half of the local dimming zones, but still we get great performance here. So they're meeting a demand in the market for, I think people like these mini LED monitors. I mean, they're really popular with Samsung, but again, if I'm gonna pay $900, $1,000, $1,100, $1,200 for one of those, that's out of a lot of people's budget. I think when we're looking at this, especially with the coupon right now, if I can get this for $400, $450, that's more realistic for people in their budget. It's still expensive, but more realistic for more people. So performance of the local dimming here, to me, at this price point, really good. A lot of other monitors in this price point may only have 16 local dimming zones. You're talking about 567 here. So the performance with this is going to blow those out of the water. And I just think visually it adds, especially when you're playing darker games. If you're looking at something like Dead Space, like that is a darker game, that one really highlights just how good the local dimming here is with HDR, especially because I have that running with HDR and the local dimming. If you look to other games as well, they don't have to have HDR to still take advantage of that, meaning it's not an in-game setting. You just have HDR on and utilizing local dimming. Again, these visuals just pop. They just look really, really good. And that's when I look at Ori and the Blind Forest here. My camera's having a little bit of a difficulty just focusing on this, but the local dimming here is making sure that all the areas that would normally be darker, and on a regular VA panel, you might get a glow to that, or if you had an IPS panel, you might get a glow to that black area, where here it's going to turn those mini LEDs off so they are pure black like an OLED. It makes the other visuals pop here, so just everything looks better. So local dimming here, it gets a huge thumbs up from me with this. I think it just performs great. Visuals here just look incredible. Now, more specific to the performance, with the UFO tests, noticing some ghosting. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the gray area section. But for me personally, at this price point, I think it's good. It's not great, but it's good, because the UFO test being one thing, how does that translate to the visuals in a game? And playing first-person shooters and some other fast-paced games, personally, I don't notice it a ton. Now, if you have a more keen eye to it, that may be an issue for you. So if you are a hardcore gamer, or, I mean, some enthusiasts may notice it, it may be a deal breaker for you. But for your casual gamers out there, like, you're not going to notice this. I would make that adjustment to put this to one of the settings that I mentioned, the standard or the advanced, because you are going to get more visual fidelity out of that than just kind of where it's off right out of the box. But I think performance wise with this, it delivers a pretty solid performance across the board between fast-paced games and slower-paced games with all of these settings turned on. So if you're using HDR, the local dimming, all that stuff, it still is performing really good across the board with all of those. And that translates to consoles as well. Specifically, I wanted to touch on this because I've used the PlayStation with this, and it just looks really, really good. The local dimming, you get to make that adjustment here, and then all of the footage with that for this is HDR. Visuals pop. Everything that I'm talking about is kind of specific to PC or to consoles. If you have a console, especially now that the PlayStation, for instance, can do native 1440p, the Xbox can as well, you get to play everything 1440p, native resolution, local dimming, and then just solid HDR. Great performance with this across the board. Next, we have the KVM switch. I like when monitors have this. I mentioned that earlier. At this price point, it's not something that I would expect, and the fact that they have it is just a really nice touch. It makes this feel like a more quality product. I like being able to just run a keyboard and mouse to the monitor, and then anything connected to that monitor can tap into that. So I'm not having to disconnect that and run it to something else. Very nice touch here. And then the inclusion of the USB Type-C port that can deliver 90 watts of power, but also doubles as a display input. Another thing at this price point, some monitors have it, some don't. It's kind of just a toss of the coin as to whether or not you see that on some of these, meaning it's not standard across the board. But with this, not usually something I expect. So when a monitor does have that, very nice touch, just gives you more options, not only for the input here, but for charging as well. And for anybody that does have a handheld out there, Steam Deck, AOK Zoe, Legion Go, ROG Ally, whichever one, this now allows you to connect that to the monitor, play your handheld on the monitor, and still charge it at the same time, which is very, very nice. And the last thing here is going to be the physical adjustments that this has, as that can be hit or miss at this price point. Usually you do find height adjustment, maybe a tilt. If you're lucky, you get a swivel. And then if you're really, really lucky, you get a pivot. And this one has all of those. So they covered all their bases with this. Again, price point here, hit or miss with some of those. So I like the fact that they do cover all of their bases with the physical adjustments. So that is the good section. A lot of good to talk about with this monitor. And on the flip of that, we have the bad, the negatives here. I only really have one thing, and that is the text clarity. I've seen this with other monitors. We're looking at the same size in terms of the screen, same panel type, same resolution, but some look more pixelated than others. And that's after running ClearType. So I've run ClearType on this to improve the text clarity here. It just looks more pixelated to me. and I can't fix it. I don't know what the deal is. And again, looking at other monitors that are the exact same specs with the panel type and all of that, and they aren't pixelated. So something's going on with the sub-pixel layout here that just doesn't make text look great. Now, if you're playing a game, that's where it can pop up. It may be something that you don't like the visuals of that. I think for most games across the board, it'll be okay, but you may find some, it's just pixelated text that you don't like. So for any content creators out there, or if you're dealing with text a lot, I don't know, you write reports on the monitor, you don't just game on it or something like that, this may be something you want to be mindful of. I don't know that it's a deal breaker by any means, but it just may be something that you are frustrated by. So just expect that you're going to need to run ClearType with this. It may not get to where you want it in terms of the look and the pixelation that you see with text. So that's actually going to be it for the bad or the negatives. We just have the one thing with that, which is a very good sign. Moving on now to the gray area, which are things you may or may not care about, starting with repairs. This is a brand that has been making panels for other companies, so you know that there's a history there, which I love. But now that they've branched out on their own, what is that process like? If something breaks with this and I do need to make a warranty claim, I don't know how that process works. Personally, I've not had to do it, which is great, but I don't know, like I send it off to them. This brand is in China. Does it go back to China? Do they have a repair shop here? I don't know any of that information. I need to reach out to the company to hopefully get a response in that regard, but I know it's going to make some people nervous. Personally, I'm not as nervous about it. I usually don't have many issues with panels if there are dead pixels when I get it, and I haven't had anything like that with this monitor. But if that is the case, I usually just return it through Amazon. And then once I get one that's solid, it usually remains pretty solid with that. But I think that is going to be something most people potentially will have just a lingering concern about. So that could be something to just be mindful of. Next, the pink color here, the like begonia red. It's not red, it's pink. I'm not a big fan of that color personally, just because all the pictures it does look red and it's not. It's more of a pinkish color. So if you don't like that aesthetic to that I don't think it's a deal breaker. Just be mindful of the fact that it's not a true red here. But the overall aesthetics of the panel and the molding here, I really do like. And I also like the lights on the back of this. I don't think that's a plus or a minus when it comes to this. It's cool if it has it. If it doesn't, I'm not really concerned about it. We don't get as many lighting effects as we see on other monitors, but it's there. So I just like the aesthetics overall of this. And then last we have ghosting, like I mentioned. So I go back and forth on this. I think what would make this like a tier S for the price point monitor, in my opinion, is if this had a 1 millisecond gray to gray response time and not motion picture response time. If it was faster, you would have overall better visual fidelity than the ghosting that you are seeing with this. But that is also looking at, at this price point, you can find it on monitors. So I know at this price point, you can find 1 millisecond gray to gray response time panels, but looking at the collection of everything that they've put into this, that may have been more of a budgetary decision, because I believe that's going to be more expensive to get the panel to have that. So if you are a hardcore gamer or an enthusiast where that is very important, I don't know that this is going to be the monitor for you. I think for everybody else, I don't think it's going to be a big deal. You may or may not notice it, but I don't think visually it's going to be a deal breaker if you are noticing some level of ghosting, if you can catch it. Because usually it's the hardcore gamers that are noticing if there's any type of ghosting in this. And that's where you're going to want to go towards something like an OLED, or a lot of those people are still playing on TN panel monitors, right? So just be mindful of that. I do wish it was faster, but I understand that that's potentially going to make this more expensive, and they just really delivered with the price point here. So if the response time and ghosting was kind of one of the main things that you needed, they do have IPS panel monitors that do have that 1 millisecond gray to gray response time, but now you are switching panel type and you don't get the many LEDs. So I think that's where they're dealing with all of this, is kind of trade outs of what's the panel type, what can we put in it, and where can we nail everything and deliver a price point that is going to be something people are going to pay for this once it hits the market. And so now let's go ahead and shift over to comparisons with their different models to the Samsung Neo G7, kind of give a breakdown of these different options, because this is what I mentioned earlier, is they kind of have these steps in between what you see with Samsung. So the top one here, you have the M27P20P. This is like the upgraded version of the monitor that I'm reviewing right now. With that one, a lot of the same stuff in terms of having two 2-watt speakers, built-in KVM support, HDR 1000, USB Type-C with 90 watts of charging power. Those are kind of all the same. The bigger changes here is this M27P20P is 4K. It's also an IPS panel, not a VA panel. The refresh rate is 160 Hertz, not 165. They're both 1 millisecond motion picture response times, but I'm going to suspect that because it is an IPS panel, it may actually have a little less ghosting than this one has. We still have the same number of mini LEDs here though. They are both 576. Another big difference is because that is 4K, it does have the HDMI 2.1, not 2.0. So if you are using a console, you do get that native 4K resolution. Looking at the price difference between these two though, the one I'm reviewing right now, again, $549 with a $150 off coupon right now. That brings it down to $399, so it's $400. That top monitor is $899 with a $260 coupon right now. That brings it down to $639. So for an extra $239, basically $240, you get 4K IPS panel with the HDMI 2.1, and then kind of everything else is the same with this. So would that be a draw for you as an upgrade? So we have that step from this monitor to that next one that gets us closer to that Samsung Neo G7 price tag. And with that, there's a step above this that they have that we're going to look at. So this is the M32P10. With this is the most comparable to the Samsung Neo G7. So these are both 32 inches. In terms of the local dimming zones, this one has 1152. The Neo G7 has 1196. So what a difference of 44. They're both 4K. This one is 144 Hertz, where the Neo G7 is 165 Hertz, so not quite as many Hertz with this. They are both 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response times. This is HDR 1000, while the Neo G7 is going to be HDR 2000. So again, this is more comparable spec-wise than the monitor that I'm currently reviewing. This would be the closest, and it's actually the exact same price as well. So typically this is $1,199, but there's a $300 off coupon, bringing this down to $899. The Samsung Neo G7 is typically $1,299, but right now it's on sale for $899. So right now you can find both of these at the exact same price. I don't know how long that's going to last. So if you're watching this down the road and it's not the same price, these things fluctuate. But if they're running sales, they potentially can be the same price. So at that point, which one are you going to go with? That's going to be up to you as the consumer here. It's just, what are you looking for? Because this one also has a 1000R curve. That's another big draw towards this. The KTC is just a flat panel that doesn't have a 1000R curve. So that'd be another major difference here. I mean, if they're the same price, you probably are most likely going to go with the Neo G7 if you do want a 1000R curve and you want just the slightly more Hertz with this. But outside of that, that's really just, again, what are your preferences here? Now, I've reviewed that monitor, and I will have a link for that in the description if you want to watch that review, so you can kind of just make a better decision based off of that review. But I'm going to throw a curveball in here because I just ordered this a week ago, and with this one we are looking at an OLED, a 27-inch OLED monitor that they have. It's 1440p, it's not 4K, but you get that 0.03 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. I am extremely excited to see this in person because that is very fast. Now, you don't get the HDMI 2.1, unfortunately, just because this is 1440p, not 4K. we are dealing with a slightly smaller size. I have a 42-inch OLED that is 4K. So I'm going to see how that looks in terms of pixel density once we get down to this smaller size and make the comparison. That is $799 right now, but you get that $170 off. So you're going to bring that down to $629, which is $10 cheaper than the M27P20P, the upgraded version of this monitor that I'm currently reviewing. This one has, you're not going to need to worry about mini LEDs. This has just like the infinite, all those pixels are backlit, so you don't have to worry about local dimming or anything like that. So, I mean, just looking at that trade-off, again, they've just filled all this in-between space. So you have, like, Apple is really good with this. Marquis Brownlee talks about this, that kind of step ladder approach to how they sell you their products. It's like, hey, here's this one, here's our baseline. Well, I kind of want these extra things. Well, for an extra $100, you can get all these extra things. Okay, let's jump to that one. Well, you know, for an extra $100, you could get all these things. And it's like, okay, so you just slowly work your way up the tier of different products that they have. I like that. I like the fact that they're filling this in-between middle section that we don't see some other brands doing, where they are specs that are not maybe the full tilt that we would find with their highest end product. They are cut in half, or they are a portion of that, but at a price point, again, that more people can afford. And I know that's a lot that I just covered right there. If you guys want to see a more specific detailed video on that, I can do that. I have this OLED monitor coming in, which I'm very excited about, and I kind of want to go through the lineup. Full transparency here, the company reached out to me. They were supposed to potentially send me some review units. I don't have the numbers that they're looking for with the channel. Not yet anyways. And so they're like, hey, just not going to work out. So I've bought these with my own money. And I mean, I was kind of like, I hope they're really good, because you get rejected from a company, puts a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth, where they're like, hey, you're not big enough, we're going to pass. And it's like, oh, that sucks. But I got this thing and I'm really, really impressed. The more I've used it, the more impressed I have been with it. The price point, the features, this is just a really good monitor. And if the rest of the lineup continues to deliver, which I hope it does, I mean, this can be another top contender that people really should consider when purchasing a monitor, not just looking at MSI and Samsung and Asus and ViewSonic and all these other brands. This could be another brand to seriously consider, where you can get a lot of the other features that you're seeing with those brands at a better price point. So that's going to wrap this video up. I mean, this just gets a huge thumbs up from me. I really like this monitor. I'm very excited about the OLED. If you guys have any questions about this, let me know in the comment section. I will make sure to answer that for you there. If you like the video, hit the like button for me, as it helps the channel out. All of the products that I've talked about in this video will be in the description if you want to pick any of them up. And if you want to continue to follow along with all of my content, like the upcoming review for that OLED monitor, hit the subscribe button for me. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.